Hi guys and gals, this is Bwana Phil from the makers of Perfect Circle Net Thrower from ProKast. Today I'm going to show you what to look for when shopping for a new cast net. We at ProKast do not make cast nets, we just make cast nets better. Let's talk about cast net size. Cast nets are almost always sold by the radius foot. To give you an example, a tiny 3-foot radius net has a diameter of 6 feet if opened. A 6-foot radius net should open to 12-foot diameter. So what size net should you buy? If you are the typical weekend fisherman, hold your hand straight up and measure from the top of your fist down to the floor. This is your ideal net size. For most average sized fishermen, a 6-foot net is the optimal size. If you predominantly throw from the deck of a boat or from a dock, you might consider using a 7-foot net. On the other hand, if you're smaller, a 5 or 5.5-foot net might be more appropriate. If you will be throwing from a sitting position, you might even prefer to downsize to a 4 and 4.5-foot net. Don't waste your time on anything smaller. We always recommend attaching a Perfect Circle net thrower on every new net. The Perfect Circle net thrower is comparable to putting a turbocharged motor on your net. You will throw perfect circles every time, and you will consistently outcatch people throwing larger nets that only open some of the time. The size of the bait will determine what size mesh you need to purchase. You will need a mesh size that is small enough to prevent your quarry from swimming through the holes in the mesh, and not too large to allow them to swim through it. The size of the mesh will also affect the sink rate of your cast net. For instance, a mesh size of 1/4 inch will have more water resistance than a net with a mesh size of a 1/2 inch. The smaller mesh will consequently sink slower, allowing more bait to escape. You will want a cast net with a mesh size small enough to catch your bait, but large enough to sink rapidly. For 2 to 4 inch shad on area lakes and 3 to 5 inch finger mullet or piggy perch on the coast, I found that 3/8 inch mesh works best for me. If you're trying to catch 1 to 2 inch minnows, a 1/4 inch mesh might be better. If you are trying to catch larger bait, you may want to consider looking for a 1/2 inch mesh or larger. There are 2 basic types of net material, braided nylon and monofilament. As a general rule, braided nylon netting is found on the smaller 3 to 5-foot radius nets. Nylon nets have 2 distinct disadvantages. The netting is thicker and it offers more water resistance than the monofilament nets. This means that the nylon nets sink slower and allow the bait to scurry out of the way before the net sinks. The nylon netting is also more visible, which can startle the bait and make them scatter. On the plus side, nylon can be thrown dry and tends to be more flexible. Monofilament nets, on the other hand, have a smaller netting mesh diameter and therefore sink faster and are also less visible to the bait, so you are more likely to surprise your bait and capture them before they can escape. However, on the downside, monofilament nets must be wet for about a 1/2 hour before using. Monofilament netting will absorb a small amount of water and become more pliable and lose most of its memory. This is not a big issue if you mist, spray, or dip the mono net in water early in the day and keep the net wet until it's used. Be aware that all monofilament net material is not the same. Some of the cheaper nets use a stiff monofilament that retains a memory and figuratively throws like a ball of barbed wire. Other cast net companies use a limper monofilament line that throws easier and spreads much farther. This is a 3-foot net that has been used several times, and I can barely get my hands around it. On the other hand, this is a brand new 7-foot net that is soft and limber right out of the package. So what kind of netting should you get? Monofilament or nylon? If you primarily throw in very shallow water, then the nylon netting might be right for you. If you frequently catch your own bait and throw in water deeper than 1 foot, the monofilament might be a better choice. You can get your net wet and limber early in the day, and it will be ready to use throughout the entire day. The way the netting is sewn is critical to how it behaves on the water. There are 2 primary sewing methods. The first and probably cheapest method of making a net is to sew it like a bullseye. I personally hate this kind of net. The mesh at the seam will pucker up. This surplus netting will be difficult to grasp, and when this type of bullseye net is thrown or lying flat on the ground, it will always have a nipple in the center. These are 2 6-foot nets. They should both be 12 feet in diameter. This one is a bullseye type net. Notice the nipple? The much better method of making a cast net is to make the net like a pie. These nets might cost a little more, but a 6-foot net will lay open a full 12 feet and will not have a nipple in the center. A panel net will also throw easier and have a uniform mesh size. You can see the 6 different pie sections, proof that the Perfect Circle net thrower will consistently expand a net to its full capacity. A very important part of a good cast net are the lead weights and the lead line. Most cast net manufacturers advertise the weight as weight per radial foot. Let me give you an example. A net with a 6-foot radius that is advertised to have 1/2 pound per radius foot would have 3 pounds of total weight. The same 6-foot radius net that is advertised to have 1.5 pounds of lead per radius foot would contain 9 pounds of weight. Most of your department store entry-level cast nets only have 1/2 or 3/4 of a pound per radial foot. These nets don't throw well and don't sink well. For more effective catching in water up to 6 feet, you will need a net with at least 1.5 pounds per radial foot. If you're trying to catch bait in really deep water of 10 feet or more, or if you're using a net with webbing around the circumference to keep it open in deep water, you might even consider a net with 2 or more pounds per radial foot. The faster the net sinks, the more bait you'll catch. Almost as important as total weight is the way the weights are distributed around the lead line. A net with 6 pounds of weight would weigh 96 ounces. 96 1-ounce weights distributed around the lead line circumference is much better than the same amount of weight distributed around the lead line using 48 2-ounce weights, with twice the spacing between the weights. The larger spacing makes the lead line pucker and create a scalloped edge that will allow most of your bait to escape. The material used for the lead line rope is also important. Some ropes are stiff and do not pin the bait to the bottom, but leave some wavy scalloped edge that will allow the bait to escape. The better ropes are softer, more flexible, and pin well to the bottom. Cast nets have an enormous price spread. Some nets only cost $15, while the top-end nets will cost many hundreds of dollars. So which one is right for you? Some very sage advice is, always buy the best cast net that you can afford. I've owned and still own and still use cast nets that I purchased 10 years ago. Some of these nets have been ripped and resewn and ripped and resewn again, but they still work great, and my original Perfect Circle net thrower is still attached to them. If you're prone to throw a net over jetty rocks, oyster shell reefs, or over submerged tree stumps, you might want to invest in a lower cost net and throw in open water over sandy bottoms or where there's little chance of snagging or tearing your net. You should use a better quality net. We invite you to view all of our ProKast net videos. We'll show you how easy it is to assemble a Perfect Circle net thrower to your net. We'll show you how to prep and throw your net with a Perfect Circle net thrower attached. We'll show you tips on the multiple ways and advantages to using your cast net with the Perfect Circle net thrower.